Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist depression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It's your local community radio station that you're tuned into. My name's Andy and I will be hanging out with you for the next hour. And we're broadcasting on Jagera and Turrbal country, of course. And on today's show, we are going to be talking about doing time for the planet. There has been in this country recently a few people sent to prison for environmental activism, and they have been recently released. And they've got plenty to say, actually, about the reasons why to do that and what it's like inside. And so it's actually going to be a two-part special. Today on the show, I'm going to talk to Violet Coco and Brad Homewood, who both did 3-month stints in Melbourne in prison for the most recent action was that they blocked the Westgate Bridge, a big highway in Melbourne, and stopped traffic for a few hours to raise awareness about the climate emergency. And next week we will talk to Ali Alicia, who went to prison in Tasmania under their reasonably new anti-protest laws, aggravated trespass laws. He locked onto some forestry equipment to try to stop logging of an old-growth coupe, and he was also sent to 3 months. But yeah, it's really good to hear the insights from people who have been inside. For one, because prison is a part of our society, and we're all kind of somehow complicit in this system that locks people up. But it is not a good part of our society. It doesn't seem to do very much to stop crime, and it certainly does a lot of damage to people when it is, in theory, rehabilitating them. And so we need the insights of people who've been in prison to work out how to do this better. And I think these interviews are quite good for that, from hearing people who have gone in there and are not necessarily in a state of a kind of feeling bad about what they've done, or feeling fear, or feeling hatred against the world, rage at the world for having locked them up. They're in an analytical space, so they've got interesting insights. And also, I think a lot of activists through history have gone into prison and will continue to in the future, because it is an established method of trying to create social change, particularly when there's a whole system that kind of is stopping some of the changes that we would like to see happen from happening. And so you've got to use all the tools at your disposal. And so as a movement that wants to try to create positive social change, we need to work out how best to support people that are in prison who are doing that sacrifice for the world they believe in, for all of us. And so there's some good insights there into solidarity with prisoners. And of course, I should mention at this point that, of course, David McBride, we covered on the show a few weeks back, is in prison now for 5 years for telling the truth about what our military was up to in Afghanistan. And so when you hear him talking about what it's like in prison and the solidarity and things like that, it's worth remembering that there are still people in prison, and that they could do with our support and solidarity. And yeah, in general, I think It's great. These interviews are really good as well. I really enjoyed doing them to show my own solidarity with these people who have done these actions and who also have this kind of insight. But also, it's just so great to know it's not good to go to prison. It's not a worthwhile use of anybody's time. It's not a good place. And it's not necessarily for everybody, you know, activist-wise. Some people are better equipped to deal with it than others, and some people just should never contemplate doing that if they don't think they'll be able to last it. But it's so good to be part of a social change movement where people are not afraid of going to prison. You know, where people believe that there are more important things than their own comfort and their own liberty. And so it's great to support these people by hearing from them, and it's a real honour, I guess, to be sharing some of the work with these people. And I certainly feel blessed that we've, through all of history, so much of the freedoms and the rights that we have now actually came from people who were willing to make serious sacrifices for the sake of future people they would never meet. And we're living in that reality right now, and it's so great to be alongside people who feel the same now and are trying to create that world for our future generations. And so stay tuned for the next hour, and also next week when we talk to Ali, there's lots of great insights. And also Brad and Violet, we don't do that many romance stories on the Paradigm Shift, but there's some very sweet moments in this interview about, I guess, as a couple, what it was like for them to do prison stints. Not together, of course, so you don't get to go to prison with your romantic partner, but to be doing it at the same time, and what it's been like for them as a couple. And so you'll get to hear that as well. Something to look forward to in the sort of second half of the interview. Let's have a listen to Brad and Violet.
My name's Violet Coco, and I am a frontline activist to protect the livability of our planet.
Yeah, my name's Brad Homewood, and I'm a frontline climate activist predominantly with Extinction Rebellion, but not exclusively.
And both of you have just last month got out from stints in prison. Can you give us a bit of a background of how you ended up in there?
Well, there's a long version and a short version, but the short version is that we parked a truck across 3 lanes of traffic on the Westgate Bridge, declaring that all states of government and society should declare a climate and ecological emergency. But the long story is that we've been in this game of civil resistance for quite a few years now, and this wasn't our first time engaging in non-violent civil resistance to call for stronger action on protecting our livability of the planet.
Yeah, additional to what Violet said, I think we've been on this trajectory since about 2019. So I think it's important that the listeners understand that you don't just do one big action and you go into prison.
As you said, you have both been arrested a number of times, and I suppose would have known this was coming somehow, but still did it. It's not very common for people to sort of willingly end up in prison in some way. So do you want to tell us the theory behind doing this kind of political action where you are intentionally risking prison?
Okay, that's a really important point. We're very conscious of the trajectory that we were on as far as the criminal justice system is concerned. So we went into this action. I had underestimated the state a little bit. I knew a custodial sentence was a possibility, but I kind of thought we'd get a CCO because Victoria has hitherto at least been more progressive. Violet was pretty convinced that we would get a custodial sentence, but having said all that, we're both willing to make that sacrifice. Like, we went into this action willing to make the sacrifice and willing to do prison if that's what it came to, and essentially we wanted to do something that could not be ignored, with the frustration, with the lack of policy and attention on climate at the moment. Quite rightly, there's a lot of attention on the genocide in the Middle East, and that's fantastic, but climate has fallen off the radar a lot, and we wanted to remind people that we're still in a climate emergency, and these things are inextricably linked for a variety of reasons. So we wanted to do something that couldn't be ignored, and we were willing to make that sacrifice, is the short answer to that.
Yeah, so recently Nature Communications released a journal article that had a study in it that surveyed over 24,000 people, and it showed that actions, just like civil resistance, like the actions that Extinction Rebellion do, increase concern on climate. And that is essentially what we're doing, is that we believe that people need to be concerned about the fact that our climate is changing in a way that can reduce our capacity to survive on it, and many other creatures' capacity to survive on it. And we're experiencing an eco-collapse right now. We're in the tipping point where, you know, what we do in the next 3 to 4 years matters. And, you know, nobody wants to go to prison. Nobody wants to experience arrest and the repression of the state. But we understand that throughout history, social change has been triggered by people engaging in civil resistance when the polite and normal societal measures to make change have failed, which they have. The government have been advised on the climate breakdown and the reasons why we're experiencing climate breakdown, like the burning of fossil fuels and the destruction of our ecosystems, for decades. And they have failed to act, and not only failed to act, you know, emissions continue to rise. Australia has a huge responsibility because we are the third largest exporter of carbon emissions. We're like the drug dealers of the fossil fuel industry. And you know, people are sort of being lulled into a sense of complacency through fake election promises and greenwashing of stats. But the reality of the situation is that we need to pull emergency speed levers to reduce our emissions to zero as fast as humanly possible, and to repair ecosystems that have been damaged through human interference and extractivism. And if we don't pull those levers, very soon we will cascade into such catastrophic weather conditions that we won't be able to grow food, and with that an increase in violence and societal collapse. And so basically we've made the calculation that it's more important to essentially sound the alarm on the danger that we are in than to have our freedom to go about our lives in what would be an otherwise quite privileged manner. And it only takes looking around the world at the devastation that people are already experiencing. And in fact, within our borders, there are people still displaced from the floods and fires that we experienced within the last decade. And so, you know, we're lucky as activists that we can decide to do this action. And then, you know, obviously experiencing 2 months of prison is super crap, but at the end of the day we get to walk away from that and still have our health and our community, whereas there are people around the world who are experiencing genocides and from this colonial extractivist mindset. And so yeah, I mean, in one way there's a lot of strategy, but in the other side there's also a lot of just like courage and love that goes into being willing to stand up and try something and not give up on the situation.
Yeah, I guess in theory it's one thing doing these kinds of actions, but I am curious about, like, after having done a stint inside, has that changed your perspective at all on doing these kind of civil disobedience actions and doing them repeatedly?
I suppose that's a question around deterrence. And, you know, the court talks about general deterrence and specific deterrence. And the short answer to that is we will not be deterred, and we will continue to do what we believe is in the best interest.
100%.
Yeah, in the best interest of humanity and the planet, essentially. And if we're locked up again, then others will follow.
Yeah, I 100% agree that, you know, we don't want to go to prison, but I am prepared to continue that trajectory as long as it means strategically acting to protect the planet.
And I think that's the key word there too, is, you know, you're not just going to willy-nilly at a whim do something that's going to land you back in prison, but, you know, we'll continue to do what we believe is in the best strategic interest of the movement, and that's probably going to mean at some stage doing another stint in prison. That's just the reality of it. As Violet alluded to before, all large movements in the past have all involved people doing time in prison, at the tip of the spear, if you will. And
if you're going to be annoying enough, they're going to try and silence you. And the aim of the game is to not be afraid. because fear is the mind killer, and what we need is just a whole lot of courage and a whole lot of people willing to step into that courage to make a better world, because on this current trajectory, it's as Professor Will Steffen said, who's one of the leading climate scientists in Australia, we are facing hell on earth if we don't change our ways.
Yeah. And at the end of the day too, the only place we can find hope is in a culture of resistance. I can't find hope anywhere else. And if you stop being part of this resistance, personally, I just fall into a state of despair. And I don't want to live in despair. I'd rather live in hope. So this is the only place we can find that hope, is in the culture of resistance. And we need to build that culture, and we need to build that movement. And I honestly believe it's only a matter of time before more people wake up and realise it is our last best hope.
Originally, you were sentenced to 3 weeks in prison, and then you appealed, and the prosecution counter-appealed, and you were given a 3-month sentence. I guess, what was the theory behind the appeal, and did you know that was a risk, and do you regret making that appeal now?
Yeah, I guess the appeal kind of had this dual strategy. One was to be able to get out and sort of participate in the rebellion that was happening at that time, which I was able to do. I got out on 4 days on bail appeal, and obviously the second was to try and seek a better justice, because activists shouldn't be put in prison. I genuinely believe that, and so you've got to try. Even though I'm willing to face prison, I don't believe that we belong there, and so you've got to try and seek justice as best as possible. I don't regret doing the appeal. Ultimately, it ended up with another round of media, which is more bang for your buck on terms of sounding the alarm with the one action. And I think the police would have appealed anyway with the extra evidence that they had, and the media storm that was being whipped up. So yeah, ultimately I got that bail 4 days out to be able to march on the streets with the rebellion. So that's good. Yeah,
and I totally support that. I think there was a lot of positives to the appeal, even though on the face of it, it appeared negative. And I know at Ravenhall, where I did the last 5 weeks of my sentence, some of the guys in there couldn't get their head around the fact that we appealed a 3-week sentence. And it's like, 3 weeks, that's a fair whack. Why didn't you just accept it? And, I had the conversations with the guy. I said, you're looking at it from a criminal perspective, but you've got to look at it from an activist perspective. So from an activist perspective, it wasn't a bad result. Yeah, sure, we had to do extra time, but there were positives to that time as well.
What was the time in prison like, and do you have any reflections on it? I guess, firstly for yourself, and then maybe reflections about prison as a thing.
Well, there's no getting around it. Prison's hard. They're not easy places to be in. In Victoria, for the men, you start out at the MAP, the Melbourne Assessment Prison, and that's a maximum security prison. And I spent 3 weeks there, and when the screws first walk you into the yard, it's pretty confronting. But you adjust, you learn to adjust, and for myself, I feel like I'd been on that trajectory for quite some time. I'd done a lot of time on remand in different custody centres, and it kind of eased the blow a little bit. I don't think anything prepares you for that moment, but it did ease the blow a little bit. You've got to keep your head down. You've got to be respectful to everyone you interact with. You stay away from the drugs, and you stay away from the gambling if you can't sort your debts. And there's no one. You soon learn there's nobody in there just going around randomly attacking people for no reason at all. So if you do keep your head down and be respectful, then physically you're relatively safe. But there are no guarantees either, because I saw people look at people the wrong way and that go bad, etc. I did end up personally, after the 3 weeks at the MAP, I ended up at Ravenhall, which is a B-rated medium security, and I ended up in the Koori unit there. And I felt very fortunate to end up in the Koori unit. I made some good connections there. The elder of the unit knew some people that I knew on the outside through some work I'd done as an ally, and that helped a lot. Jail's not good in any way, but I had a relatively decent jail experience at Ravenhall. because I did keep my head down and, I wasn't rude to anyone and I'd made those connections, and that really helped. But it is boring and it is monotonous, and you've got to try and keep yourself busy. And, from my experience, that means, using the gym equipment and working out, and it's important that you make friends. And those friendships are really important. And you try and stay out of the prison politics as much as you can too, but the catch there is the longer you're there, the harder that gets, because you've made friends with certain people, and one of those friends might get caught up in something, and then you've got to make a tough decision about whether or not you want to get involved in that as well. And so there's all these really difficult things to navigate, including the two sets of rules. There's the screws rules and there's the inmates rules, and that's a very steep learning curve as well.
Yeah, I'm also just really cognizant that of the other men that we've had taken through the prison, one of the biggest dangers in terms of activists, some of our friends, the biggest dangers have been when the guards, or more colloquially termed screws, have told the other inmates that the activists have different charges that make them unsafe. So we've had people beaten up in prisons because the guards have said, he's done XYZ to kids or whatever, and that's like gotten him bashed and things. But relatively, like, when I went into Dame Phyllis, I had a lot of the women sort of really stoked about the actions that we'd taken. They watch a lot of television, they've watched a lot of documentaries, and so a lot of them do know that the environment's fucked, and they feel really helpless in there as well. A lot of them are women in Dame Phyllis are mothers, and so, they've got kids to worry about as well. And, in terms of the prison system and my journey through the prison system, I had a lot of empathy for the women that I was in there with. The Dame Phyllis Frost, they've defunded the trauma counselling in there, and a lot of the women are in there because they've had very traumatic lives. They've survived violence against them from men in their lives, and they use drugs as a coping mechanism, and they need more mental health support, and they're just not getting it. One of the women I was in there with, she turned to drugs because she was a mother and she had cervical cancer, and she was feeling the pressure of trying to be a mum and care for her kids while also getting chemo. And so the drugs gave her this superhuman ability to be a better mum for her kids. And obviously I'm not endorsing that strategy, but I'm just saying that the system is completely punitive, and it's not helping anyone. Don't think that this punishment system is actually, a good result. And you can see that in the statistic all around the world, but especially in Victoria, where within 2 years, 48% of people in the Victorian prisons end up back in the prison system. So it's not stopping people from committing crimes or displaying antisocial behaviour as the system would see it. Yeah, I'm a total prison abolitionist, and I've obviously been involved in prisons. I've seen the other side of it, where the healthcare in the prison is deadly. There were women who almost died while I was in there from the screws' lack of care. Like, a woman had heart failure, and she was found frothing at the mouth by one of the other inmates who was there the night that Veronica Nelson passed away. And you're just very cognizant that the system isn't working, and that the women's lives are in danger. And I wish that there was more I could do to help that struggle and that fight for better care in prisons. And I'm really grateful for platforms like yours, Andy, to talk about that for them.
Yeah, look, I'd just quickly like to add to that, because you do feel a responsibility to the people you did time with. You do make friendships in there, and quite a few friendships. And there are a lot of good people in there who've made mistakes, or, for various reasons have taken a certain path in their life, but you do feel a responsibility to them. And to, I too am a prison abolitionist as a long-term vision, but in the interim, definitely it's a system that needs a lot of reform, and there's a lot of state-sanctioned violence in there. And one of the most simple things they could do in there is just give everyone their own cell, because what they call a one out, a cell to yourself, is used as a reward for good behaviour and a reward for working. So until you've earned that in this system, you're pushed into a 2 out. And you especially see that at the MAP, the Melbourne Assessment Prison, where complete strangers, some of them coming down hard off drugs, etc. A lot of people with mental illness in there, really bad mental illness, like people just talking to themselves all the time and unable to engage with other people. They're just shoved into a cell together, and most of the violence happens in those cells because a lot of these people don't know how to talk or negotiate with each other. As a fight over trivial things like who's on the top bunk, the bottom bunk, and TV, hygiene habits, sleeping patterns, etc. And any honest screw will tell you that's where a significant part of the violence happens, and you could avoid that by making sure that everyone has their own cell. And you hear that after the map, they lock you down at 4:30 every day, and after 4:30 you hear the screaming, you hear the thuds. It just happens, and it happens on a really regular basis, and the state is fully conscious of that, and they could avoid it. But as we know, there's no votes in prisons. Any honest ex-politician will tell you that.
For you two being inside there, what were the things that enabled you to keep your spirits up inside and keep going?
Well, it was pretty hard for the first month because we couldn't contact each other, and I think, being able to connect with your community and your loved ones is something that really gives you a lot of strength. And that's another problem with the system. Like, if you make a mobile phone call from inside the prison, it can cost you like $12 to $13 for 12 minutes. And so it's really hard to get your numbers on lists and things like that. But once we were able to get letters to each other, that really helped because we could sort of share the experience. Our prisons were right next door to each other, so we were writing to each other about birds and different sunsets and all this sort of stuff that was happening. And even though there was like a 2-week delay on the letters getting through, it still kind of kept us feeling closer. I did a lot of reading. I read 7 books in 2 months, which is just like absolutely luxurious for my current lifestyle where I'm like frontline hopping and I struggle to get a couple of pages in every day, whereas, just like long hours of reading. I got so many letters, and the letters really kept me going from the whole community. It was like over 100 in total, and the prison actually returned to sender a lot more, which I'm finding out about now. That having them sort of the letters and postcards and thank you notes and kids' drawings up on my wall just filled my heart every day, because I knew, the power of the state is to separate us, and so our strength is to stay connected. And so I felt that strength every morning seeing those letters and cards up on my wall. I baked a lot of cakes. I was actually able to have a kitchen in my unit, and so I convinced the women as I baked vegan cakes that because it was plant-based, it was actually salad, and they loved that. And so I was sharing a lot of salad around, and but there's nothing like your own freedom. There's only one tree in the whole unit at Dame Phyllis because they block the camera line, so I got to know that one tree very well, but definitely enjoying going out bushwalking now and bathing in the forests and things like that. And obviously knowing that I would get to do that stuff and just having patience, cultivating patience. I'm also a Buddhist, so I do a lot of meditating and breathing and just self-care of my psyche in that way, and watching and allowing my feelings. So those things all contributed to me to being able to get through and come out well.
Yeah, it looks similar for me. Like, we're both very privileged to have a really good support network on the outside, and this is something the activist scene needs to get right, is because it's inevitable that more people will follow in our footsteps. And we're going to run workshops around this in the future for sure, because it's so important. So to have that strong support network on the outside is a real game changer, to make sure the money, you get $150 on your canteen spend every month, and you get $70 on your phone account every month, just to know that that's going to go in. That was really important. I too struggled for the first month because Violet and I had been separated, and I knew we were all good, but I hadn't heard from her, and I was really pining for her and really craving to hear from her. And right on that 1 month mark, I got this beautiful batch of letters and a beautiful proposal letter, and that would just put the wind in my sails. And it was my greatest source of strength and resilience, to be honest. That was a real game changer. Beyond that, for me, I looked at it, it's an opportunity to get really fit because there's gym equipment at Ravenhall, so I'd have a daily routine where I'd work out and do the cable weights and the exercise bike and the rowing machine, and I'd practice yoga on the outside, so I'd do yoga in the afternoon, and I did a lot of reading as well, so all that community side of things. And then the letters too from the activist community, they were wonderful, and kids' drawings again. Like Violet said in one of the letters to me, it's the small graces, and it really is those small things that really make a huge difference. Also played a lot of pickleball. I didn't know pickleball really existed until I went in. It's like a miniature form of tennis, and there's a lot of that played in our unit and in the gym at Ravenhall. So that was a great game and really good cardio, and played a lot of that. And to be honest, I walked out of there fitter than I've been in a long time. So just trying to focus on the positives and think, okay, I've got time to really focus on my fitness here. And, I'd write a letter to Violet every day and then, write a letter to reply to the people who'd written to me, and just trying to fill your day and, get a little bit of a routine established for me. That really worked for me. Yeah. Look at it as a learning experience. What can I get out of this?
Yeah, with the fitness thing, I always think, even in the watch house, like, after a couple of hours, you're like, oh, I'm so bored. I guess I'll do some push-ups. And it's such a cliche, but what else can you do in there, eh?
It's a cliche for a very good reason, because there's a bit of a joke going around in there that it is a bit of a fitness camp, It's a fitness camp for, this is the other thing people don't understand. There's also, they are miserable places, but there is also a lot of humour that goes on in there, and it's humour out of necessity. So there is jokes about, it's just a big fitness camp for all the naughty kids and all that sort of stuff. So,
and there's also the thing that the men get buff, but the women end up rolling out, because we bake each other cakes and eat a lot of bread while we're in. We don't do push-ups. We do baking.
Well, it sounds like you've got some exciting news, and I was curious actually, because you two are in a different situation to many, where as well as doing actions together, you're also a couple in life. So, how did it affect your own relationship, this experience?
Well, as Brad sort of alluded, I proposed to him halfway through the sentence via interprison mail. So it sort of only made us stronger in that sense. Like, you go through something like this together, and you really, we already really were very, very connected, obviously, but I got to that point of filling out the form of, like, trying to get it into prison call, and it's like, but he's just my everything, And so yeah, it really strengthens us, and, I think going through actions together, when you're doing it with someone you love, like, obviously there's an element of extra fear, because the person that you have this super bond with and you want to keep safe, you're also taking into this really dangerous environment. But you also feel 10 foot tall and bulletproof, because the person that you love is with you in this really dangerous environment. So there's a history in the queer community of there being sort of this, we need an army of lovers, and I think that's, I'm going to sort of drag that into the environmental defense, is that, there are a lot of really strong couples who do this work, and I think, it's hard and it can break a couple, but as any sort of big hard work can do, but it also gives you something, we're both passionate about the same thing, and we see the world the same way, in that way, being aligned politically and in our worldview, I think it makes us stronger on this journey. Jim, what do you...
Well, I don't disagree with anything you said, not surprisingly. It definitely strengthened and deepened our relationship, there's no doubt about that. We were madly in love before we got locked up, but that time apart really makes you value these things even more. But I did call it at one stage the Violet Coco paradox, because while Violet was my greatest source of strength and resilience in there, it was also what made it hardest, was the missing her and pining for her physically as well. So it was a bit of a paradox, but we've definitely come out and through that experience with a much stronger and deeper love and commitment.
Especially the letters. Like, it's such a rare experience to write to your partner for 2 months. And Brad would write to me every day, sometimes 7 or 8 pages of write. Like, it was just so beautiful, and he's got such a way with words. And so, yeah, it's such a different experience to go through that together.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your proposal, and I guess that's one thing you've got coming up to be excited about. What else? Now you're back on the outside, what are your other plans for the future?
Well, we are as committed to the struggle as we've ever been.
We're currently in Palawa Pakana people country, Lachuita in Tasmania, defending the Tarkine and, doing some forest activism. And we plan to continue the struggle for sure. We've got some more forest stuff happening in Victoria. They're like destroying forest in the name of fire protection, which is just completely scientifically not valid. And also up north, there's some, Bellingen area, there's some forestry going on. And, the forests are the lungs of our planet, and it's sort of the site of destruction. So we're definitely very interested in that. There's also the rising tide in November, the coal port there, they're blockading. 10,000 people are going to be a part of that event, so that's really exciting for us to go along to that. Lots of other little actions. Stay tuned. Obviously, we can't talk about too big spicy stuff, but watch this space. We're definitely not going to be silent.
Yeah, and XRVIC will be mobilising again as we come out of winter. I've also got my case coming up in the courts in Victoria, where I've got a team of barristers and solicitors representing me pro bono, running the necessity defence on the climate emergency. So I'm pleading not guilty for a barrel lock on I did at ExxonMobil's Yarraville facility a few years ago. So, yeah.
ExxonMobil made me so angry. I'm so glad. Anyway, it's going to be such a good platform to talk about how they've known. They did the science reports decades ago, and their response to the finding out about how fossil fuels will raise the temperature and raise seawater levels is to raise the level of their oil rigs that are in the ocean and then invest a whole bunch of money into climate denial. So I'm really keen for that court case to play out on the climate emergency defence.
All right, well, thanks so much, Violet and Brad, for chatting with us today, and it's great to have you two back on the outside and back organising, and for all our listeners as well, so thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Andy.
Thanks so much, Andy. Thanks to the listeners for taking the time, and let's all get out there. Remember that civil resistance is our last and best hope.
That is Brad Homewood and Violet Coco there, talking about their experiences in prison and doing civil disobedience for our planet. And yeah, it's a hard slog, doing these things sometimes. It's amazing the joy and energy that those two bring to it, and I hope that some of that came through in that interview. And I know as well that their experience have really shown the need for solidarity, and I know just last year being at the rising tide blockade of the world's biggest coal port in Newcastle and seeing people arrested. It was cold, it had been raining, people had been up not sleeping very much, and there's a bunch of people arrested and they're still sitting out there waiting to be processed. And just to see Violet and Brad, just the solidarity that they were offering to those people and the support, it was really inspiring actually. And yeah, just their energy to keep going and commitment is something certainly to be admired. And they had some really good insights about prisons as well. And I think prisons are a real issue in our society. And as Brad just said, there's no votes in prisons. Nobody, the media, whenever they need to convenient scapegoat people who've committed crimes, are always there for them to complain about. And in fact, there's often these kind of media releases about the economic benefits of building new prisons in regional areas. Of course, at the moment, the media has this massive scare campaign about youth crime, and they very rarely show any data about how much youth crime there is. It's just anecdotes about something that's happened, and there's also very rarely talk about what do holistic solutions mean other than just berating young people's antisocial behaviour. But anyway, it is very valuable to hear from people who've been in prison and have that experience, and who have talked to the people inside there, and to try to work out some solutions for what to do about issues of crime, antisocial behaviour, and poverty, addiction, things like that end up with people in prison. And it'll be a better world for us all. The less people are in prison, the better society we'll have, and the more caring society we'll have, I think. And so a good reminder, of course, that there's lots of people locked up in prison. One is David McBride. I haven't yet looked up details of how to write to him. I haven't seen it anywhere, but certainly he's in there for a long time, and so we'll be requiring us to keep remembering him on the inside for telling the truth about what happened, what our military did in Afghanistan. And there is an event coming up actually on Saturday 22nd of June. There's a letter writing to people in prison, and that won't necessarily be protesters. That'll be just a list of people in prison who have put their names forward as somebody who would like letters. And I'll tell you what, a bit of human connection and solidarity does a lot more to rehabilitate people who have, done things that maybe they shouldn't have, or whatever, or been through a lot of traumatic things, than locking them up in a prison cell ever will. And so prisoner letter writing is really valuable. That's coming up. It's a group called IRL Prisoner Solidarity Network, and so you can find details about that. Of course, the Locked In show is on 4ZZZ every Monday night from 6 to 8 p.m, and where you can hear prisoner solidarity in action as people both from the inside and the outside are writing letters to each other and being read on air. And next week we'll be talking prisons again. I'll be talking to Ali Alicia, who also did a 3-month stint in prison that he just got out of a couple of weeks ago for protecting Tasmania's forests, old-growth forests, from being logged. And so we'll hear his own story and his own insights from that time. So I'll see you next week on The Paradigm Shift.